A little while back, I made a video talking about my personal top 5 tips to have a great Session 0 to kick off your own D&D campaign. And towards the end of that video, I brought up a concept that I came up with known as Session 0.5, or the session before Session 1. In today's video, I would like to break down exactly what Session 0.5 is, why every single campaign needs one, and how Wizards of the Coast has already printed the perfect template for setting up your own Session 0.5. So let's talk about it. Welcome to the MetaMagics channel. If this is your first time here and you are looking for GM tips, player tips, or anything Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, be sure to subscribe. And once this video is done, if you have any questions you want to ask me specifically, you can leave them in the comments down below or jump over to my Twitch stream and ask me in person. I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. Link to that in the description down below. With all of that out of the way, it is time to talk about Session 0.5. Actually, really quick before we start, this video will contain spoilers for the beginning of the Lost Mine of Phandelver module. So if you haven't played this module yet and don't want to be spoiled, this is your warning. You good? Good. So I came up with Session 0.5 as a way to bridge the gap between Session 0 and Session 1. Meaning this is the session that comes after the characters are created, but before the actual campaign begins. Now some of you may be asking, what is the point of this? Well, for all of you new GMs and even some of you veterans who haven't maybe ran a game in a while, this is your testing session. If this were a video game, this would be considered something like an open beta in any multiplayer game. This is where you get to try everything you've initially planned out for your party and make adjustments as necessary before the actual campaign begins. And if this still isn't making sense to you, then it's time to break down one of the most perfect templates for any Session 0.5, the start of the Lost Mine of Phandelver module. For those unfamiliar, the Lost Mine of Phandelver module is the module included in the starter kit for D&D 5e sold at certain retailers. And the opening section of this module perfectly encapsulates everything that I am trying to get across, and here's why. Almost immediately at the start of the game, the adventuring party is ambushed by a pack of goblins. The goblins attempt to surprise the party by rolling stealth while the characters roll perception to see if they see them. Combat then ensues. Now what is supposed to happen here is the party is supposed to defeat the goblins except for one who escapes into a tree line to go back to the camp that they came from. The players then follow the goblin to the lair or camp that it came from to see if they can finish the job. Now within such a short span of time, you as the GM have already been able to collect a little bit of data regarding the power level of your players through both their combat prowess and their skill checks, all within the span of 1 minute of game time. When the characters end up reaching the hideout, it is found to be inside of a cave. There are some guards outside of the cave that the characters deal with before going in, but once they go in, the characters are then introduced to their first dungeon. This is known as the Cragmaw Hideout. Now immediately when your characters enter the cave, they are introduced to several mechanics such as different intensities of light, bright or dim, the difficult terrain mechanic with the rubble, sounds requiring perception checks, and stalagmites introducing the cover mechanic. Also immediately after entering the cave, the characters will notice that there are 3 wolves chained to a stalagmite in the ground. The characters then have the option of using an animal handling check to attempt to tame these wolves, or attacking them should they decide to. As a GM, the lesson to be learned here is that your characters are already being introduced to your skill check mechanics, which is great for new players, and it allows you as the GM to take notes on how well they do against each of these skill checks. This essentially allows you to balance your future encounters in the game while the characters are currently playing your game. Because while it is always important for the players to be taking notes during the session, it is also important for you, the GM, to be taking notes on how well your players do so that you can balance future encounters and keep the game even more engaging than it would have normally been. This also applies to the difficulty of your combat encounters. The original combat encounter with the 4 goblins could really swing either way as your characters start out at level 1. You then also have the different creatures of the wolves to test their combat prowess if the need arises. Later in the dungeon, the characters come upon a group of 6 goblins keeping one unconscious human, Sildar Hallwinter, prisoner. Now, the idea behind this encounter is the players are supposed to bargain with the second-in-command goblin to release the prisoner by striking up a deal. Now, without going into too many details, once your party has completed this section of the adventure and they go back to retrieve Sildar, it is important for you as the GM to figure out exactly how they interact with NPCs. This is where you learn whether your party is a group of comfortable role players who want to interact with all of the NPCs in your world to gain unique experiences, or if they just want to murder everything for the experience points. The lesson to be learned here is that giving your players a throwaway NPC in session 0.5 means that you can gather invaluable data before giving them any of your actual NPCs that you have prepared in your main campaign. Also bundled in with this section of the adventure is learning how to balance your boss encounters, as the goblin who made the deal with the players wants them to deal with a bugbear boss who resides within the cave elsewhere. So now you as the GM have the second part of your data collection complete and being able to balance your own boss encounters. Or in Lost Mine of Phandelver, this boss is just a throwaway character who makes 0 appearances later in the adventure module. Now, once all of these objectives have been complete and all of this data has been collected, the characters then leave the Cragmaw hideout and finish their trip to Phandalin, where the real adventure finally begins. So at the end of the road, what is the takeaway from this? Well, to start, you get to learn all about your players' party composition, meaning how powerful they are, how they handle skill checks. You get to teach them all the mechanics of the game if they are new, without having to just explain it to them from the book. And you get to see exactly how well your party handles different situations, be it a roleplay situation, a combat situation, skill checks, anything of the sort. And collecting all this data allows you to go into your actual campaign, tweak things around to make them more or less difficult in terms of combat or skill checks, and it will give your party the most fantastic and engaging session 1 that they will ever have. I hope at least some of what I've said made sense to you. This is basically just a way of planning your game while you run it, which I think is a very engaging way to do this with your players. I haven't really seen anybody else talk about this exact thing, so I figured I would make a video talking about my own experiences with it. Now, of course, you probably don't want to just drag and drop the starting section of Lost Mine of Phandelver into your own game and call it a day. So I'm going to give you guys an example on how I use this template to create a great session 0.5 for the Dragon of Icespire Peak module, which actually can be run in tandem with Lost Mine of Phandelver if you choose to go that route, as it is included in the Essentials kit, which is basically an upgraded version of the starter kit. So the way it worked was this. The party was already level 5, having just completed the Lost Mine of Phandelver module, which ends at level 5, and I had the party meet an NPC outside of the main tavern of the inn that they were staying. The NPC in question was a traveling merchant who peddled in magic items, who had his competition steal one of his most prized possessions. The party was then tasked with going to retrieve this item out in the foothills somewhere outside of Phandalin, with the reward being a magic item of rare or higher quality. The party accepted and they went out onto their adventure. And while the party was in the foothills outside of Phandalin, they came upon another magic item peddler who claimed that a roving band of hobgoblins stole a magical item from him and carried it into a cave nearby. After some questioning from the party agreed to go retrieve the item for the man that they just met. So right away, I've already introduced the party to 2 NPCs to see exactly how they would interact with them and use that information to plan for any future encounters with NPCs. So once the party ventured into the cave, they came across a group of hobgoblins and combat ensued, and I recorded exactly how well they did against the hobgoblins for future notes. After going through a couple rooms of combat encounters, they eventually came upon a closed door, which inside had a boss hobgoblin. Or maybe it was a bugbear, I actually don't really remember what it was. But I remembered how my party in the previous module kind of stomped through almost everything, so I decided to, on the fly, beef up the hobgoblin's hit points, give him a little bit more damage on his attacks, and they still ended up stomping through him, and so I recorded that data down, and I was able to adjust all my encounters that I had planned in the future, making them a little bit more challenging so it would be a fair fight. Players ended up destroying the boss, retrieving the item that they were told to go look for, and returned to the second man that they had met. And after some further questioning, the party then realized that this was the man who stole the artifact that the first NPC was looking for. So with this new information, I then watched to see how my party would react to this NPC being not necessarily hostile, but also not on good terms with them or any of the previous people they had met. So of course they did what any good NPCs would do, and they killed him. It was a bit more spectacular than that. If you want me to tell you the exact story, you can leave a comment down below. I'd be happy to do a campaign retelling. It was actually a really fun campaign. But long story short, they defeated the second magic item peddler who stole the item, and while they were going back to town in the distance, I had already set up the plot hook for the actual campaign, and that was the end of the session. Right away, giving them a standalone one-shot session 0.5, as I had described, to gather all the data I needed to make the rest of the campaign as awesome as I could possibly make it. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave it a like, and if you have any questions, leave a comment down below, guys. And until next time, happy gaming.